It was a normal Friday evening. I had just turned 23, and I decided to take a short trip to clear my mind. Work had been stressful, life had been noisy, and I needed a few days completely alone. I rented a small cabin up in northern Maine, far from the highways and the city lights. The kind of place where you could hear the wind moving through the trees and the occasional call of a distant owl. It was peaceful, exactly what I wanted. The cabin itself wasn't fancy, just a simple wooden structure with a porch, a small living room, a wood stove, and a bedroom in the back. I drove up in the late afternoon, unloaded my bag, and let myself inside. Everything smelled faintly of pine and old wood. Nothing about the place seemed off. I made myself some dinner and turned on some music. It was the kind of calm evening where you feel the stress of your week slipping away. The sun had almost disappeared behind the thick forest, and the shadows were growing longer in the corners of the cabin. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Too quiet, maybe, but I brushed it off. That was the point, wasn't it? To be alone. To escape. I sat on the little chair by the window with my meal, staring out at the forest. The trees swayed gently, the wind moving like it had a rhythm of its own. I sipped my coffee and tried to focus on the peace around me. And then I saw it, a shadow. Not outside, not in the trees, but inside the cabin. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks in the dim light. Maybe the sun's last rays were casting shapes across the floor. But it didn't move with the sun. It stayed there, lingering near the hallway, just beyond the reach of a lamp. I told myself I was imagining things. I tried to laugh it off. "You're just tired," I said aloud. "It's a normal place. Nothing's here." But even as I said it, a chill ran down my spine. Something didn't feel right. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the feeling of being watched settled in my chest. I could feel my eyes flicking to that corner, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. I went to check the locks on the doors. Everything was secure. The windows were closed. The porch door latched tight. And yet, that shadow seemed to have a presence. Like it was waiting. I kept my phone in my hand, a silly comfort, even though the signal was weak out here. It was a normal evening in a normal place, with me just trying to enjoy a few days alone. And yet, something was wrong. Something was in the cabin with me, something that didn't belong there. I didn't know it yet, but this small, subtle hint, that feeling, that shadow, that presence, was only the very beginning. By the time night fully fell, I realized the peaceful trip I had planned was about to become the most terrifying experience of my life. And I wasn't sure I would make it out unscathed. The cabin was exactly what I had hoped for, small, rustic, and completely isolated. It sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by dense pine forest on all sides. The trees were tall and thick, their trunks dark against the fading light of evening. From the road, you couldn't see the cabin until you were right on top of it, which was part of why I chose it. I wanted solitude. No neighbors, no passing cars, no distractions. Just quiet. Inside, the cabin was simple. A small living room with a worn-out couch and a tiny wooden coffee table. A wood stove sat in the corner, and above it, a shelf lined with old books and a few knickknacks left by the previous renters. There was a small kitchen with just the basics, a stove, a fridge, and a sink. A narrow hallway led to the bedroom, and past that, a tiny bathroom. Everything had the faint smell of old wood and cleaning products, and the floor creaked slightly whenever I walked. I remember thinking it added character, even though it also made me more aware of every little noise. It was early evening when I arrived. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor outside. The sky was turning deep blue, almost purple, and the first stars were starting to appear. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either, just that kind of quiet, unsettled in-between that makes you notice every sound. Even the wind felt heavier out here. I was here to disconnect. Life back in the city had been relentless. Work was stressful, friends were busy, and I hadn't had a moment to myself in months. I needed a few days away to read, think, and just breathe.
No fones, no notifications, no obligations.
Just the cabin, the trees, and the silence. It was supposed to be peaceful. The only other person involved was the caretaker, who met me briefly when I arrived. He was a middle-aged man, friendly enough, but quiet. He gave me a quick rundown: make sure the doors are locked, don't wander too far in the woods, and keep the wood stove fueled if it gets cold. That was it. After he left, I was completely alone. No one else would be around until I left in a few days. I unpacked my things, made myself a simple dinner, and settled into the chair by the window. I could see the forest outside, dark and still, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. At that moment, it felt perfect. No interruptions, no stress. Just me and the woods. But even in that quiet, I noticed small things that didn't make sense. A door that creaked even though no one was touching it. A shadow near the edge of the hallway that seemed too dark to be a trick of the light. A feeling, subtle but undeniable, that I wasn't completely alone. I told myself it was nothing, that it was the imagination running wild in an empty cabin. Still, that unease lingered. And that's the thing about places like this. They feel safe, normal, calm. Until they don't. After settling in, I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that had been nagging me since I arrived. I told myself it was normal, new place, quiet, dark outside. But as the night went on, small things started to stand out. It began with the noises. A soft creak in the floorboards whenever I shifted in my chair. I assumed it was just the cabin settling. Then I heard something else, a low tapping against the window. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the glass, but the sound didn't match the rhythm of the wind outside. It was deliberate. I froze and listened. Nothing. Just silence for a few moments. Then it tapped again, soft and slow, like someone testing the glass. I walked over to the window and peered out, but all I could see were the dark shapes of the trees. No branches moved in a way that could explain the sound. The air was still, almost too still. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal, a squirrel or a bird. But a small part of me didn't want to admit it. As I returned to the living room, I noticed another detail. The hallway leading to the bedroom seemed darker than it should have been. I had lights on in the main room, but a shadow stretched across the floor, long and thin. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in it, like it shifted just slightly as I watched. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Then came the sounds from inside the cabin. A soft thump from the kitchen. My stomach tightened. I walked over, flashlight in hand, and found nothing. No dishes out of place, no doors open. Just the faint smell of the wood stove still lingering. I started to feel watched. Not imagined, but a real, prickling sensation that someone or something was aware of me. I tried to keep busy. I read a book, poured another cup of coffee, but the feeling persisted. I heard breathing. Slow, soft, almost too quiet to be human, coming from somewhere just beyond the hallway. I froze in the chair, listening. My own breathing felt loud in the silence. Then the footsteps started. Barely audible at first, but consistent. Slow steps across the wooden floor, coming closer to the living room. I checked the doors. All locked. The porch door was secure. Nothing outside could explain it. My heart started to beat faster. I turned off the lights to see better into the dark corners of the room. That's when I saw it, a fleeting shadow near the edge of the hallway. It didn't belong. It moved differently from any tree branch or reflection. I felt a rush of panic, but I stayed still, hoping I had imagined it. Every small sound, every shadow, every movement made the cabin feel less like a retreat and more like a trap. That night, the quiet wasn't comforting. It was watching. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was waiting. After that first night of strange noises and shadows, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But by the second evening, the signs of danger became impossible to ignore. I was cooking dinner when I heard a floorboard creak behind me. It wasn't the usual settling sound. It was deliberate, like someone had stepped lightly and slowly, careful not to make a mistake. I froze, my hands hovering over the stove, and listened. Then came a whisper. Soft, low, almost unintelligible, coming from the hallway. My name. Just my first name, murmured slowly, deliberately. I felt my stomach tighten. I wasn't alone. I checked. All the doors again.
Locked.
The windows?
Locked.
Every point of entry secured. But that didn't stop the panic from creeping in. I moved to the living room, trying to keep myself calm, but every shadow seemed to stretch differently now, as if they were following me. The dark corners near the hallway seemed thicker, heavier. I could feel eyes on me. Not a trick of the light, not the wind, not anything natural. It was deliberate.
Real.
And it was getting closer. I grabbed my phone, but the signal was weak. I couldn't even call out. I paced the cabin quietly, trying to listen for footsteps. They were there. Slow, rhythmic, coming toward the living room. I held my breath and pressed myself against the wall, thinking maybe if I stayed still, I could observe without being noticed. Then I heard a knock. Light, hesitant, but unmistakable. At first, I thought it was on the door. But no, it was coming from inside. The bedroom door. The bathroom. Somewhere close enough to touch. I couldn't tell. My hands shook. Every instinct was screaming to leave, but I didn't know where to go. The porch door was locked, the windows were secure, and the walls felt thinner somehow, like the cabin itself was betraying me. I remembered the caretaker's warnings, the brief instructions he gave me. Keep the doors locked. Don't wander far in the woods. That had seemed like common sense at the time, but now it felt ominous. Someone had been here. Had been inside while I thought I was alone. A shadow moved across the hallway again. I saw it clearly this time. Not a trick of the light. A figure crouched near the corner, barely visible. I couldn't make out the face, but the posture was deliberate, tense. Waiting. Watching me. I backed up slowly, trying not to make a sound, but I could feel the cabin shrinking around me. Every space I could hide in suddenly too small. The fear settled deep in my chest. I realized I was trapped. Not physically, maybe, but psychologically. Every exit, every safe corner I thought I had, felt compromised. That shadow wasn't going anywhere. Whoever or whatever it was patient. And it had been inside long enough to know every creak, every corner, every blind spot. By the time the sun fully set and darkness filled the cabin, the threat wasn't just possible anymore. It was here. Close. Watching. Waiting. And I had no idea when it would make its move. I didn't expect him to move so fast. One moment, the shadow was crouched in the hallway, almost still, and the next, I saw him step into the doorway.
A man.
Average height, dark clothing, hood pulled low over his face. I could see his hands, tense, ready, but I still couldn't tell if he had a weapon. Panic hit me all at once. I dropped the coffee I had been holding and stumbled backward. My chair fell over. He didn't speak. Didn't move quickly, just stepped closer, methodical, deliberate. I realized I had only a few seconds to decide what to do. My first thought was to run. Straight out the front door, down the dirt road, and never look back. But he was blocking the hallway, and the porch door was behind me. I dove for the kitchen, grabbed the heaviest pan I could find, and swung it toward him blindly. It didn't connect. He moved faster than I expected, sidestepping easily, but it bought me a second to sprint toward the back door. It was locked. My hands fumbled with the latch, shaking so badly I could barely turn it. I could hear him moving toward me, slow, steady footsteps that made my chest pound. I yanked the door open and ran into the night. The wind hit my face, the trees looming overhead like walls. I stumbled over roots and branches, scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't stop. Every snap of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush, made me flinch, thinking he was right behind me. My phone slipped from my pocket, but I kept going, too terrified to stop and pick it up. Finally, I saw a faint light in the distance, a neighbor's house. I screamed and pounded on the door, desperate, shaking so badly I could barely form words. The door opened, and I practically fell inside. The man outside had vanished. I heard nothing except the wind through the trees and my own ragged breathing. Police came shortly after. They searched the cabin thoroughly, checking every corner, every closet, every room. When they spoke to me, their faces were serious. They said the man had been inside the cabin before I even noticed. They found a backpack tucked under the couch. Inside was a hunting knife, several small tools, and a camera set up to record anyone in the cabin. He had been watching me for hours without my knowing. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the shadow crouched in the hallway, the way he had stepped toward me, calm and patient. The thought that he had been inside, possibly still nearby, was almost worse than anything he could have done to me physically. I realized then that the cabin wasn't safe. The forest wasn't safe. The roads weren't safe. I had been trapped, completely unaware, and it had taken nothing more than patience and planning for someone to get inside my life, my space, my solitude. Even now, thinking back, I can't forget the way he moved, the quiet intensity in his presence. That moment, when I was face to face with him, is burned into my memory. I barely made it out, and I know it could have gone differently. The next morning, after the police left, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me exhausted and still on edge. I decided to go back to the cabin, not because I wanted to stay, but because I needed answers. I had to understand who, or what, had invaded my space. The police report said they found his backpack under the couch, a hunting knife, some tools, and a camera. But it wasn't until I started looking through the cabin myself that the real horror became clear. There were signs I had completely missed the night before, subtle, almost invisible details that suddenly made everything make sense. First, the bedroom. The closet door had a faint scratch along the inside of the frame. I hadn't noticed it because it was so small. Then, near the wood stove, I found footprints in the dust, small, deliberate, as if someone had been pacing for hours. But the worst part was the camera. I thought it had been tucked casually under the couch, but when I turned it on, I realized it had been positioned to record the main living space, perfectly aimed at the chair where I had been sitting all evening. And then I saw the footage. My heart dropped. The man had been inside the cabin long before I even arrived. He moved silently, careful not to make noise. He had hidden in the corners, crouched in the shadows, observing me without me ever realizing it. Every creak I thought was the floor settling, every shadow I thought was a trick of the light, had been him. But the real shock came when I noticed something else. The camera footage included images from outside the cabin, too. He had been watching the driveway, the road leading up to the cabin, and even the car as I parked. He had known exactly when I would arrive, and he had prepared for it. This wasn't random. He had planned it. Hours of surveillance, careful hiding, and patience, and I had been completely unaware the entire time. The final detail hit me like a punch. On the last frames, the man was crouched near the hallway, watching the living room. And then, very slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled something small, metallic. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was deliberate.
He was ready for me.
That night, I had escaped by pure luck, by instinct, not because he had missed me. He had wanted to get closer. He had been waiting for the perfect moment. The realization settled in. I hadn't just survived an intruder. I had survived someone who had meticulously planned every move, studied me, and waited in my space for hours. Every step I thought was mine alone. Every moment of calm had been under his scrutiny. He wasn't just dangerous, he was patient, calculating, and methodical. For the first time, I understood the magnitude of what had happened. I wasn't the lucky one. I had just barely escaped. And the most terrifying part? Nobody knew who he was, and there was nothing to stop him from doing this again. To someone else, somewhere else, maybe even to me again. Even after the police left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin, the forest, and the road leading up to it were no longer safe. I stayed at a nearby motel that night, lights on, doors locked, phone at my side. Every creak, every rustle outside made me flinch. I kept checking the windows, listening for footsteps, imagining shadows in the corners of the room. Sleep didn't come easily. The next day, I tried to rationalize everything. He had been caught on camera. The police had evidence. They said they would patrol the area, investigate the surroundings, and check the local reports for similar incidents. But I couldn't stop thinking about the unknowns, Who he was, why he had chosen that cabin, and whether he had done this to others before me. I drove back to the city, but the unease followed me. Simple things became triggers: a shadow passing outside my apartment window, a noise in the hallway, a car parked too long near my building. Every minor detail set my heart racing. I kept the lights on, but I couldn't escape the feeling that someone might be watching, somewhere, waiting for a chance. Weeks later, I tried to convince myself it was over. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe he had been caught. Maybe it had just been a single, isolated incident. But one night, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. No return address, nothing inside except a single photograph: the cabin, the exact angle of the living room where I had sat, the same chair, the same hallway corner, the same shadows. I never reported it. I didn't know what I could say that wouldn't sound paranoid. But holding that photograph, I realized the terrifying truth. He had been inside my life before, and he might still be close, even now. I didn't know where he was, and that uncertainty was worse than anything he could have done physically. Sometimes I still feel watched. Walking down the street, driving home, even sitting alone in my apartment. I can't see him, but I can feel the presence. It's subtle, a fleeting shadow, the sense of someone pausing just behind me, breathing almost in time with my own. The fear has become part of my everyday life. And then there's the thought I can't escape. The cabin is still there. He knows it. Someone else might rent it. Someone else might experience the same terror I did. The thought that it could happen again, and I would never know, haunts me constantly. I haven't returned, and I probably never will. I've learned to live with the quiet panic, the small moments where I feel someone is just outside, watching. Because the truth is, I still don't know who he was, and I can't be sure he won't come back. Sometimes, when the wind shifts in a certain way at night, I swear I can hear footsteps just beyond the trees, moving closer to wherever I am. And that's the thought I carry every day. Maybe he's still out there, patient, waiting, watching.